That's all.
Welcome to the Alcohol Addiction Podcast. I'm, of course, your host, Lee David. Today, our special guest is Dr. Gail Brenner. How is life, Gail?
Life is very good today.
Yeah.
Happy to be here with you and all your listeners.
Yes, we're going to have some fun in the next 60 to 90 minutes of that, I am sure. I found out about your work via one of my community members who said, check Gail out. She's got some interesting views. So I bought the book, The End of Self-Help, Discovering Peace and Happiness Right at the Heart of Your Messy, Scary, Brilliant Life. It's a long title. I have to read it. I remember The End of Self-Help book. And what drew me to it, Gail, initially was I remember once I quit drinking alcohol and everything changed, right? So my brain's not foggy anymore. I start to philosophize. I start to think about life like I'd never thought about it before. Realized that I hated my job and suddenly questioned why I'd been doing it for the last 20 years. And basically, I quit drinking through a book, reading a book. So then someone had bought me the Jack Canfield Success Principles for Christmas many years before. It was the only book I had in the house. And my mind's free of addiction, so I picked the book up and read it. And Jack says, oh, you can be and do whatever you want. So I was like, okay, I'll quit my job then. So I quit my job. And slowly then over the years, I was going to books and to mentors to kind of get inspiration and to show me the map. And I remember writing in my bucket list that I wanted to speak at a public event. And a friend of mine, it's literally in the same week, a friend of mine said, Lee, will you do me a favor? I'm running this seminar for postnatal depression. Will you talk at this event? And I said, what on earth do I know about postnatal depression, right? And he said, I don't care what you talk about. I need speakers. And of course, it was on my bucket list. So I talked about how books had saved my life. And I'll always remember that there was, at the end when we was doing the Q&A, there was a woman there who didn't really buy my story. And she was, I can't remember her questions, but she made me very uncomfortable. I'll put it that way. So when I see books like The End of Self-Help or tweets or Facebook messages or online training courses, it does pique my interest a little bit, and I want to kind of get into it and get involved in reading it, and that's why I bought the book. Why did you actually read it yourself? Why did you write it yourself? Where did that come from?
Well, I have been thinking and writing about this topic of happiness, which is really what we're talking about here. Yeah. It has many twists and turns, but basically we're talking about how do you be happy in life, and not coming from objects that we get or situations that we're in, but an internal sense of happiness, like how everybody wants that, and how is it that we can discover that within ourselves, and it absolutely is discoverable. Mm-hmm. So I'd been writing for a long time and, doing my own path and getting more and more excited about these possibilities and more clear in my own mind about how this all works. And it was just a natural, I had written a blog for many years, so writing the book was a natural outgrowth. But speaking of the success principles, I just had a dream to write a book for many years, probably 20 or 30 years. And I just finally got to it and did it. And so it was on my bucket list.
It was on your bucket list as well.
It's been accomplished. Yeah.
And I want to just say to the listeners who are listening right now, what Gail said there is really important. I want you to reflect on that. Gail said she's in the business of happiness. She said that is what life's about, right? It's about us finding happiness. All right, maybe we can't be happy all the time, but to have a job that makes us happy, to have a relationship that makes us happy, to have friends that makes us happy, to have a life that is full of happiness. And if you're in the business of wanting to quit alcohol, but you're going to use willpower to do that, and at some point down the road, because you're doing that, you're going to start living this life of lack. Like you're going to walk into a pub with your friends and you're going to want alcohol, but you're not allowing yourself to have it. Or you're watching the game in the house and you want a few beers, but you're not allowed. then I'm afraid you will not be living a life of happiness. You'll be living a life of sadness. You'll be constrained. You won't be able to do what you really want to do. And that's not what we promote at Needy Helper on the Alcohol Addiction Podcast. If drinking makes you happy, drink. Don't give up drinking if you're going to be unhappy. That makes sense, Gail?
Absolutely. And I'm also thinking that sobriety would be at risk if you're not creating a life now that's satisfying to you. So I absolutely agree with you. If you live in that state of lack and having the urges to fill it up with alcohol or any of the other zillions of things that humans do to fill up their pain, then that's not sustainable. So what I talk about is sustainable. Happiness is a word for it. We might say peace, a deep sense of ease. And yes, to follow up on what you said about creating a life situations that are satisfying, like a job, a relationship, etc. But it's also, prior to that even, is this inner sense of peace, because we can't always rely on I call them objects, these situations, people. We can't always rely on them to be there in the moments when we need them. And, and if we put all our happiness into those, then, and these are things that change. They come and go. Relationships come and go. People change, even if we love them. Situations happen that we don't expect. This is normal life. So my interest is in finding this inner sense of stability that carries us through all of that, all of those changes. And then that also sets us up to be able to enjoy the things that give us enjoyment in our life. Why not?
You just reminded me of a Don Miguel Ruiz quote where he's talking about love, and he says, don't ever put your heart in somebody else's hands, because sooner or later they're going to drop it. And I think to recap what you just said there, Gail, and elaborate on my point a little bit more, what Gail's saying there is, let's generate that happiness within ourselves, because we can't rely on other people or other objects or other materialistic cars, clothes, whatever. That is not going to provide you with long-term happiness. You have to find that within yourself. And once you do find that within yourself, through the teachings of people like Gail, you will naturally magnetize the right people, the right situations, the right environments. You will just magnetize them. I think that's really important.
And I think where that magnetizing comes from is you don't any longer have an inner sense of need and lack. You come from an inner sense of wholeness, and there's a natural intelligence and wisdom to that kind of navigates you through. So if you're in a relationship that doesn't work for whatever reason, you're going to go, I think I need to leave this. And then that opens you to something that's more of a better fit, more aligned with who you really are. So, that inner stability, that anchor, is prior to everything, and it can really be, as you learn to trust that, and you surrender to that, which is how I live my life, surrender to that. And it shows you what to do and where to go based on wholeness and love and the desire to feel that wholeness and not on a sense of lack.
There's a lot of people who will be listening to this who are going through this process. So they've just quit drinking alcohol, they're going through the process of drinking alcohol, and they're all of a sudden starting to feel this aliveness within them. They're a little bit afraid of it. They're not quite sure what to do with it. And it's almost like I'm just thinking of a stallion that is held to a fence, that is just desperate to kick away. And all of a sudden you've stopped drinking and the reins are just about to be loosened and you can just gallop. But you look around you and everyone in your life is not prepared to allow you to gallop, and they grab your reins. And a good example is somebody who is just feeling this inner happiness and this burst in energy to go out and find a way to express themselves all of a sudden. But their partner, their husband or their wife, is still stuck, and they can't get away. Have you come across that in your work? Have you written about it extensively? What advice could we give to someone? And I know it's a really difficult question for someone who needs to leave a relationship, but they can't find that confidence or that power. And it could even be because they don't want to hurt the person they're leaving. It doesn't necessarily mean that they feel themselves they're not capable. What's your view on that?
Well, there aren't any easy answers to a question like that. Things change, though, as you know. I think of this as we can call it awakening, where you wake up to that aliveness. You start to discover that it's there, and let it express itself, and first feel it, and kind of be in wonder about it, and then realize like this is really here, and this is really changing your view of things. So it's first discovering that that's there, and then once that starts to kind of seep out into life, things change, you know, not always for all people, but I've seen that a lot where as people start this waking up, or I also think of it as a shedding process. You're shedding the things that aren't working for you, the patterns and the habits, and certainly alcoholism is a huge habit that if you shed that, the world is going to look very different to you. And that may mean that you know, you have to let relationships go, or like you did, you change jobs or quit a job that you didn't like. And these are, you know, I don't want to just blithely say, just go do it and, you know, live your truth. I mean, part of me wants to say that, but, you know, you don't want to leave a trail of tears along the way either. So I think there's just a careful navigating, staying very close to what you know to be true about yourself and speaking your truth. You know, if you speak your truth in love, not in, you know, anger or I have to get out of here or you're pissing me off or whatever, but in, you know, just stay connected in a heart way, you can say anything you need to say to people. And, you know, you're really, if you go from living a life based on lack and need and maybe codependence to a life of fullness, these changes are going to happen. And the more that you're authentic with yourself, the more that you can be authentic with others. And it's a gift that you're giving to them. It may be hard. I don't want to say that it's some easy path, because sometimes it can be very challenging and hurtful. But, you know, there's a great, just, you know, feeling of it's right when you start living authentically.
Yeah, you said something that I love there. You said, speak your truth. And that sings to me, because I'm working with so many people who don't know how to do that yet. So they're getting all these, they've stopped drinking, they're starting to feel differently, but they don't yet understand how to even engage in that conversation with the one that they love. So much so that a lot of people that I know actually hide the work they're doing on sobriety away from their partner. And what you said there that I want people to listen to and focus on now is what Gail said was, might butcher this, but let's see if I don't. You need to be authentic with yourself before you can be authentic to others. What that's telling me, and Gail jump in a moment, what that's telling me is, if you really want to move on and use this quitting alcohol as a springboard to the next stage of your life, then the work that you need to do is learn to be authentic to yourself and understand who you truly are, and to learn to communicate with you on that authentic level. And that will give you the power and the confidence to then have those conversations with those that you love from a much more grounded level. And then you can speak your truth. And once you've spoke your truth, the person who you're with now understands your situation, the boundaries, and it's almost like you, right, ball's over in your side of the court. What are you going to do with it?
Exactly. I worked with someone recently who had a big insight, you know, within about herself, and she immediately went to her family and excuse me, and all this excitement and sharing it. Huge it was just a disaster.
I've been there.
So my advice to her was just to hold it close for a while. Like, let it be her special secret. You know, let that insight percolate in her. Let her get used to that before she goes and tries to communicate it to other people. So I think there's a great value in that. You know, there's this urge, like you want to shout it from the mountaintops, you know, when you're very excited about it. But And that I really honor that energy that comes through. But there's also a great value in just keeping it close, keeping it a little secret for a while until you're really used to it, until the path becomes clear. I would definitely agree with that advice.
I love it when I'm in a conversation with somebody and we're talking about something and they turn around and look at me and say, let me think on that. Because that's like the complete opposite of me. I'm the guy who reads a book and then before I've even understood the information in it, I think I've mastered it. And I start going out preaching and then I kind of screw it up. What you're saying is, look, really understand yourself. Take your time. Don't rush this. Really understand what you're doing, how you're doing it, what is really going on for you. And you're right. The conversations that come henceforth are going to be a lot more constructive, with a lot more. Yeah. I've got this Batman kapow sign, behind the conversation, and the person you're talking to is going to take you a lot more seriously, right? Mm-hmm. And I guess you're also more, because your confidence has grown. You are going to be more prepared for the inevitable nonsense that comes out of people's mouths who are just fearful of your change.
There's another. Oh, sorry.
No, carry on.
There's another thing that can happen, which is, oh, now I know this and I want to change you. I want to fix you. I got this and I want you to get it too.
Yeah.
And that's often an energy that doesn't work either.
Yeah.
People change, and as everybody who's tried to stop, an addiction of some kind, it has to come from inside. You can't give it to someone else.
Yeah.
So like these insights that we have about life and happiness and how things work and ourselves, that it's by grace that we get those. We work hard, but then in the end, it's just given, and it's beautiful when that happens. And it can't be really given to someone else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
you can be a model. You can walk the path, and that's a wonderful.
That is one of my weaknesses. I always has been. I kind of blame my my chromosome type for that. In terms that I just always want to fix people when people don't want to be fixed. I still do it today. It's something that I work on every day. So I'm going to go through. I pulled out a few quotes in your book.
Okay.
So I'm going to go through them. We might have just touched on some of them. We'll see where we go, and then we'll elaborate on them and have a conversation. And we can both interject when we feel we need to expand a little bit for the audience here. The first one is with advice to love yourself more, think more positively, and remember to feel grateful. You might feel better for some time, but until you know yourself to be essentially whole and not the wounded and broken one who needs to be fixed, the true solution to your personal suffering will remain out of reach. What was you thinking about when you wrote that? What was going on for you?
Well, that really gets to the crux of the book, called The End of Self-Help, because all of those techniques, to fix, are about fixing ourselves. And, the way I look at it is putting a Band-Aid on the problem. And this is where the whole thing about self-help gets turned on its end, because self-help is the foundation of it is that there's something wrong with us. There's essentially something wrong that needs to be fixed. There's something off that we need something from the outside. We need wisdom, or we need a technique, or we need a new situation, or whatever, so that we can fix ourselves and be better and improve ourselves. And this is where my work combines the psychological and the spiritual. So moving into the spiritual dimension, it brings up the question of who are we really? And when we think of ourselves as this one who's lacking, or this one who needs to be fixed, and I need to, I'm empty and I need other people to fill me up, or I need to go to the right workshop so that I feel better, this is a misunderstanding of who we really are. Because these needs that we experience really boil down to thoughts and feelings. There are certain thought patterns that go on in our minds. There are certain feelings we have that if they remain unexamined, they lie underneath the surface, but they're still propelling us to do certain things and get into certain situations that aren't satisfying for us. So this is all about uncovering those patterns that we take to be true about ourselves. Like, I'm broken, there's something wrong with me. These are only thought patterns. You might be able to come up with tons of evidence to support those patterns, but they're still just thought patterns. And when our attention buys into that version of ourselves, we're missing something that's right here, right now, and available to us, which is our essential wholeness. Because when you mentioned the word aliveness, and that aliveness is always there to be felt, no matter how broken we feel, no matter how messed up and how deluded we make ourselves. That aliveness is always here in any moment, because it's the nature of life. It is life. So this work is not about fixing it by some mantra or telling yourself you're whole. You have to really know it in your bones, and you find that by going through this shedding of the thought patterns and welcoming of the feelings, recognizing all the feelings that are there, and then that stuff doesn't become what you buy into about yourself. And then what's realized is that there's a certain there's an essence, there's an essential wholeness that's already here. There's this aliveness, there's a sense of wonder. And these things can only be here right now in the present moment. We can't have this sense of wonder about the past or the future. If we have it, it's here now. So it's about discovering those essential qualities in ourselves by knowing what those thought patterns are that are making us small and limited, and shedding and realizing them, and getting the sense that these aren't really who I am. And so right in any moment, so when we talk about happiness, I don't mean happiness for all time, forever. It's only right in the moment when you can discover that happiness. And you can discover it by realizing, oh, my attention is going into this swirling thought pattern that, isn't true and makes me crazy. That can be shed and let go of, and getting to that essential essence of who we are is always here.
Okay, so
that was a lot, I know.
No, it's okay. It's okay. I was scribbling some notes. It's really interesting what you just said there, because tomorrow at 3:30, I'm going to be interviewing the author and coach Gary John Bishop, who wrote a book called, pardon my French, Gail, Unfuck Yourself, right? And he has a chapter in there where he says you are wired to win, which is kind of like the same message that you've just given. Is we are born with everything that we need to find happiness and exist in this life. And I guess what came up for me when you was talking there was there are different ways of looking at our life, right? So let's say you have somebody who's gone through terrific trauma in their life, childhood trauma, got divorced then as they got older, lost their job, think that they can't cope in life, etc., have difficulty with their children. And then they reach a certain age, 35, 40, 50, whatever it is, and they look back and they think, I can't cope. Like my life's a mess. I'm this, I'm that. I need to fix myself. But another way of looking at it is, wow, I really did really well to overcome all those obstacles to get to where I am today. And I overcame them all because I am built to overcome that stuff. And I think the thing that came up for me more than anything was acceptance of who we are, foibles and all. So when I said to you just now, one of my weaknesses is I try to fix people. That's a story that I've created, and if I'm not careful about that story, I can be trying to fix that to detriment of my own growth by going about it the wrong way. Rather than accepting, oh, do you know what, Gail? When I coach people and help people, I do have a tendency to sometimes run in and try to fix things. But I'm really good at holding space and listening and doing my best and using tips and techniques to help people come to their own realizations. That's a different way of looking at things. And I think the more positive way of looking at something is going to attract more positivity. It's going to create more positivity in other areas of your life, rather than you keep beating yourself. If you beat yourself up in one area of your life, it's going to spill into another area of your life or another area of your life. I guess I'm going to ask you a question. The paradox that I don't kind of get yet in my head is, let's say someone's suffering from social anxiety. So they go to the pub and they freak out so much that they have to drink alcohol. There's no other way of getting around this social anxiety. Now, from what we just said, there's no need to fix yourself. Is acceptance that social anxiety, that you get anxious in social situations, and you won't be the only person in the world, and that's kind of natural. Just accept that. You don't need to fix it. But what if it is really causing them harm and problems? How do we accept who we are, but still make changes to grow?
Well, and in an example like that, to me, there's a lot to be explored. So I don't, I don't say just, if something's not working for you and it's not making you happy or feel comfortable, then there's something there to be explored. So I would be interested in, and especially if somebody's socially anxious and they're going to a pub and they're drinking too much, that's a problem. And so that anxiety is asking for some attention, some loving attention, to understand what it is, and then ultimately to recognize and accept that it's there, but to not let it be the driver in the choices that a person makes. But that can only be that place can only be gotten to by really understanding that feeling comes up, understanding what that feeling is, maybe a little bit about, I'm not big about the past, but where that might come from, and be able to hold it lovingly. This is what happens. People have all kinds of emotions coming up. A lot of them are from what happened to us in the past. They get triggered now. And so we have all these parts, the part that's needy, the part that wants to fix, the part that freaks out in a pub. And, our job as the intelligent, infinite awareness is to recognize that these emotions come and to lovingly care for them. And then that brings about a tremendous integration inside. So it's not like, why the hell did I do that again? Instead we know, like, oh, this tremendous fear came up, and this fear, it goes way back to when I was 6 months old, and I get that, and I'm going to lovingly, and you can't see me now, but I'm putting a hand on the heart and a hand on the belly, which is what I really like to do, and just like hold it and breathe with it and let it be here. And that's acceptance for sure. It's deep acceptance. So in loving, it's not like, oh, that's just how I am. What I love is a very deep acceptance, like, oh, wow, this painful feeling is here. It's allowed to be painful. It hurts. And I'm going to care for it. And the I who cares for it is this loving force, this loving aliveness that just notices it and allows it to be, and understands it and holds it like a mother holds a child. And then that it begins to lose its power to be the force behind patterns that aren't working for you.
And it reminds me, what you just said there, of a conversation I've had many times with my 16-year-old boy Jude, where he'll be suffering and he'll come to me for help, and I'll say to him, you can't avoid the suffering, son. It's through the suffering that you'll experience growth. Although you just said it much more beautifully than me, Gail. I prefer, rather than use the words, you've got to experience the suffering. I like you've got to love it. You've got to hold the love for it. And I like the hand on your heart and your belly. Yeah. I really like that. Look, when in my relationship with my wife, Liza, I could be a real dick sometimes, right? And there's a recognition for me that happens, which is really important in the first place. I own it. I know where it comes from. I work on it because it's a problem that needs to be worked on. But I don't think I need to be fixed. I just know that it would be beneficial to my life to work on this problem, whilst at the same time loving myself for who I am and acknowledging that, yeah, I get angry sometimes, and that is not the greatest thing in the world, but I'm okay with that, and I'm working on it. Whereas the opposite is, I'll do what the hell I like, and if I want to get angry, then I'll get angry, and fuck everybody else. I'm not working on it. That's a completely different way of looking at it.
Different thing, and like you're saying, it's a bit paradoxical to accept ourselves as we are and change. So they, in a sense, they don't go together, but they absolutely do. You bring that acceptance to that feeling or whatever that needs to change. You bring acceptance to that, and that's the healing.
Yeah, I think what I'm hearing is by bringing acceptance to the suffering, change is inevitable. Change will come from that. So
and it does, and the change that comes is it doesn't drive you anymore. If you leave these things unexamined, like if you get angry and you go, oh, I don't feel like examining my anger, it's too hard, or I like it, or whatever, then things stay the same because there's an unexamined feeling there. And but bringing this loving attention to a feeling, even when it's hard. And what I want to say, it's hard in the beginning. In the end, it doesn't get hard. It's not hard because you realize the value of doing it, and it makes you so juicy and alive in life to feel your feelings. Like that's normal human experience. That it's not hard ultimately, but in the beginning, especially if you've been drinking that stuff away for a long time, it's like going into the dark hole that doesn't look so appealing.
That's a super important point, folks. So I just want you to zoom in on that a little bit again. I bang on about this a lot. If you want to quit drinking alcohol, don't focus on alcohol. Focus on improving your life in the areas that you need to, in well-being, health, wellness. And there's no room for alcohol. Alcohol will change as a result of focusing on somewhere else. What me and Gail just said there was, if we can focus on loving that part of ourselves that is like, if we can focus on loving our anxiety, it will change. Don't go buying a self-help book necessarily on how to cure anxiety. It's not going to do you a tremendous harm, I guess, but as long as it's not going to do you tremendous harm if you're aware that you have to do the step that Gail's talking about, I think is the point, What else we got here at your book? I became more peaceful as I realized I had a choice about whether or not I engaged with a habit. Now there's people going to be listening to this thinking, well, what's she on about? I don't have a choice. I'm addicted. I have to take these drugs. I have to drink. It's not as easy as that. Can you kind of expand upon that point a little bit?
Yeah, and it's not necessarily easy, but even if you're very addicted to something, there's still a choice to not carry out that addiction. You can feel, let's talk about it as urges, because that's common in people with addictions. You feel the urge and you can experience that urge, and it might be really intense at certain times without acting on it. And that's where you bring the love to it. So you feel whatever it is. And, I actually haven't had an addiction, so I don't know it from firsthand experience, but I can imagine, and maybe you can say the urges, can be really intense. But the benefit of just feeling them, just feeling how it is in your body, the work I do is a lot about the body, like, because these emotions and urges are in the body. That's where you feel them. There's a story that runs, but when you let go of the story, you feel that, burning or, vibration or whatever it happens to be in that moment. And you bring your attention to that and you be with that. And as your attention is there, rather than in the story, like, I need that alcohol right now, you're being with what's happening in the moment in a loving way. And you'll realize eventually, the more you do that you don't have to drink in that moment. We're making choices all the time and we don't realize it. But when we get very conscious about what our inner experience is like. And that's key the way I like to say it is we become an expert in our own experience. We have to know what we're experiencing to be able to do anything about it. And that means, as you were saying so beautifully, taking responsibility, not blaming others, not blaming alcohol, not blaming the addiction, not blaming anything really, but saying, I need to stop here. I need to take a time out. I need to see what's going on inside, because that movement to bring your attention inside to what's actually happening now and feeling it and being with it, that changes everything. And that does, you find when you do that you realize that you have options, because you're not driven by that feeling anymore.
Yeah. What from you mentioned earlier on that you haven't had an addiction. From I'm going to talk from a point of someone who's had every freaking addiction you can think of. The book Unfuck Yourself by Gary Bishop, who I'm interviewing tomorrow, he says in there that 95% of our thoughts are generated by our subconscious. We don't even know they're happening. It's just boom, 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 right? And I'm going to say something controversial here to some people who are listening. It might put you off this podcast, but I don't believe this chemical mumbo jumbo, right? It's just it doesn't vibe with me very well, because it takes away, it's an excuse to continue to use. It takes away the responsibility of control and ownership, right? I strongly believe in what Gail is saying here, and how best I put it is, I talk about hot and cold situations. So let's say that you really want to quit drinking alcohol, right? And something happens in your life which triggers a desire or a craving to have a drink. You are just automatically, because 95% of your thoughts are just automatic, you're automatically going to want to go and get that drink, because that is the habit that you formed. You formed that habit. Has chemicals got something to do with it? Yeah, maybe, but let's not lose the point here. There's a habit formed, physical habit, right? Now, what Gail is saying here is, the best way I can put it at work for me is slow the hell down.
Absolutely.
I eat my food too fast. I make love too fast. I walk too fast. I read too fast. I talk too fast. Slow down. Once you slow down, your heart rate slows down, you feel a little bit of peace. And in that moment, when you automatically want to have a drink, because you started to slow down in other areas of your life, you gain more control. And then you can start saying to yourself, okay, what does it feel like to now want to drink? Because you're now in a hot situation. And if you just sit with that for as long as you can, eventually it will go cold. And that is just the desire waning away. And you won't want to drink then, which is what Gail said, you know. I think it was Tony Robbins who talked about these hot and cold things, so you can Google it and look it up. But it really is slow down. However, continue working with a needy helper, stay on the needy helper, listen to the podcast, etc., etc. You will reach a point where you don't even have to do that, where not thinking about drinking alcohol, you've mastered it. You get something terrible happens in your life, you don't even think about drinking alcohol. That happens if you stick with a needy helper. Believe you me, it does. You get to that point, okay? But until you get to that point, you have to use these tools, these techniques, these tips to kind of like get control of this monster, this addiction, this habitual way of thinking. And, you know, a great example is smoking, Gail. Mm-hmm. Just the physical act of getting, say you're stressed out, and we can measure your stress levels on some kind of meter or something, and all of a sudden you reach for a cigarette packet, your stress levels are going to start to come down. And then you take the cigarette out, they're going to come down more. And then you put it in your mouth, they're going to come down more. And then you light it, coming down more. And now you take your first drag and you blow the smoke out, boom, you think you've chilled out. You could stick a biro, you could stick a pen in that cigarette packet. You know, it would be the same. What would happen if, I was talking to a friend this morning about this, What would happen if you always reached for the bottle of wine to deal with a stressful situation and told yourself that that took the edge off it? What if I switched your bottle of wine, took out the alcohol and gave you alcohol-free wine, and you didn't know the difference? Would your stress levels drop? Yeah. Has it got anything to do with the alcohol? No. It's your habit, you know? So break this habit by chilling out, slowing down, and taking Gail's advice and realizing you have a choice. One more thing here.
Can I add something there?
Of course you can.
When people begin to slow down, and I 100% agree with you, because these conditioned patterns, they have a mind of their own, and if you don't slow down and you don't become aware, they just keep going. Yeah. That's a guarantee. So this slowing down enables you to see what's actually going on. It's going on anyway, whether you see it or not. So the slowing down enables you to realize what's going on, but doing that might be scary for people. So I want to acknowledge that as well, because you're not used to slowing down. You have no idea what you're going to find or discover, and it might be really uncomfortable in the beginning to just be with your experience, with what's actually here. And, welcome that fear as well. It's part of it. So I want to acknowledge that that feeling fear when you start to slow down is absolutely normal. And doing these things as you're encouraging people to really, begin to take responsibility and not blame the chemical reaction. It's a sense of empowerment, and there's nothing wrong at all with using these kinds of insights or techniques, or just this idea of slowing down. Welcome these. These are here to help you and empower you so that you can make your way through this addiction. So don't feel like any of this is a failure. If you have this idea that you want to stop drinking or whatever addiction you have, that's so beautiful that movement of aliveness is coming to birth in you, and really honor that. And whatever way that takes you, it's just fine.
I like to look at it as a life experiment. Make it interesting. Get excited about change. Not get so worried about it. And I think I'm glad you said that, Gail, because I did kind of go on it on a stampede, and you're quite right what you say. It will be fearful for some people. The other thing I want to add on top of that is it takes time. So don't listen to this thinking, oh, Lee just said I need to slow down, and then next week you're going, Lee, I cannot slow down. I've been trying to slow down for many years now. I still can't eat slow. I get better at it every now and then, but the more you practice it, the better you get at it. But just cut yourself a little bit of slack. The more I looked into my experience with the sincere willingness to... No, that was not the one I wanted to read. It was the one above that. What was it? When I didn't pay attention to these thoughts, they could arise, but I remained peaceful.
Yeah.
When I didn't pay attention to these thoughts, they could arise, but I remain peaceful. Talk a little bit about that.
Okay, a couple points.
Focusing on what thought is, who generates it, where does it come from? Yeah. And I wanted to follow up on that anyway, because you were talking about all these automatic thoughts that come through. Because they're so automatic, I like to say that they're not personal. We don't make ourselves think these very challenging thoughts that we think. They just come, and they're not personal to us in a certain way. You can let them float off into, as they fade away, and it's fine. It's possible for that to happen. So the key is our attention, and this is a really important point. We have the capability of controlling. This is the one thing we absolutely have control over, which was where we put our attention. So our attention can be completely glued to our thoughts, and then we totally believe them, and these thoughts create our reality. That's one possibility. But you can experiment with it right now. If you say, I'm going to pay attention to the floor, I'm going to look out the window, you can pay attention to the trees out the window. And just like that, and I don't want to make it sound too easy, because it's not always easy, but you don't have to pay attention. And this is the important point, to the content of the thoughts. The thoughts are going to come through, and that's not a problem. But when we give these thoughts meaning, I'm not good enough, I need this as a crutch, I'm so anxious I can't stand it.
when we give these thoughts our attention and we make the content of those thoughts feel very true, that's when we suffer. And it's possible to just, as an example, put your attention on the breath. I like to use the breath as an anchor. So you bring your attention to the sensations of the breath, breathing the breath. And then when that's where your attention is, you're not paying attention to the content of the thoughts. So it's possible to shift your attention around to focus it on something that's very adaptive and useful for you, which is the breath, which is right here in the moment, or looking around and thinking, oh, there's a tree, there's a room, there's a painting, and just orient yourself to the present moment rather than orienting yourself to those endless stories that go through the mind. So what you give your attention to is what grows. And if you give your attention to stories that don't take you where you want to go, that's what your reality is going to be like.
So what you're saying here, Gail, is we don't create the vast majority of our thoughts.
Correct.
Right. And if that seems a little strange to anyone listening, then get a notepad out and write down the 5 weirdest thoughts that have really disturbed you the most, that are not you. Look at it and then ask yourself, did you create those thoughts, right? We've all had some pretty weird thoughts that did I really think of that? It's not us, okay? So what you're saying there, Gail, is recognize that it's there, but rather than kind of attach yourself to it and give it meaning and power, just kind of like go, oh, there's that thought that I'm incapable of dealing with social situations, floating by. So I guess meditation, let me ask you actually, meditation, does that help then?
Yeah, absolutely. Meditation can help. But in the end, that way of being with your experience gets incorporated into your life. And you were referring to that too. At some point, this all becomes more natural. But certainly a formal meditation practice can help in the beginning. And I like to use the metaphor of the sky and the clouds, where the thoughts are clouds. And sometimes they're pretty stormy clouds, or there's a hurricane coming through. And then you're the sky. The cloudless sky. The sky is open. The sky can be here, but it's not affected by the clouds that come up in it. So be sky and let the clouds, the thought clouds, just float on through and not attach to them. As we attach to them with our attention, that's when the trouble starts. But we can just go, oh, thought, and then be sky, and I love that. Just go out and, I don't know, wherever you are, but a cloudless sky, and just see that, feel that, get that, like that. Let your mind be like the cloudless sky, and let everything else come and go and flow through.
I'll tell you what I used to do when I first started meditating. I started doing transcendental meditation. If my transcendental meditation heard what I'm about to say next, she'd beat me up. But I used to have thoughts, and it would take me a while to realize that I was having them. And then when I realized I was having one, I would almost like catch it, like in a fishing net. And I would throw it in this box, and I would kick it out, and I would watch it float over a waterfall. And for some reason, that thought never came back. And then I would, almost like I'm ready to lift weights, I would then, okay, set myself up for my meditation, and I would go again. And then I would follow the same process. And then maybe in a 20-minute meditation, I'll maybe get 1 or 2 minutes of like transcendence, not even transcendence really, but just some calm. So if people are listening to this thinking, oh, every time I meditate, all these thoughts come into my head, it's natural, just
absolutely
don't let it freak you out. Just don't worry about it, Okay. Everything I took myself to be was made up and temporary.
That's profound, isn't it? That's a huge statement. And when I say take myself to be, I mean thoughts. The thought like I'm inadequate, or I can't do this, or I'm too afraid, or something bad will happen if I do this. I've had a lot of fear in my life. And those fear-based thoughts, if I buy into them, not a happy life. But if I realize that, wow, that's not me, and this actually goes back to what you were saying at the beginning, with the success principles, one of the points behind that is to you can be afraid if you want, but don't let that fear be the thing in charge. There's something else, something way bigger beyond your thoughts or before your thoughts that's fully alive and filled, overflowing with potential. It's the foundation of life and the universe. And when we get in touch with that, we realize that these thoughts, that what we take ourselves to be, are just a tiny little contracted ball that isn't nearly the truth of who we are. And the truth of who we are is just filled with potential.
I think one of the blockages that prevents us from understanding that we are the architects of our own misery is that we continually look at external sources as the source of our fear and pain. So you could be in a relationship and you're not feeling that connection or that intimacy with your partner, and you think your partner's being a bit of a dick or whatever, and you will blame that person for you being miserable right now, but it's your thoughts and feelings about that situation that's causing your misery. And there's two stages here. There's the very profound, holy shit, I'm creating this moment. And then there's the work to do something about that. Yeah. And that work is reading books like The End of Self-Help, hiring people like Gail, joining the Needy Helper. But you need to first of all understand that you are creating your experiences via your thought in the moment.
I like to shift the language a little bit and say the thoughts are created. We don't create those thoughts.
Yes,
So you are not those thoughts. So that they come, definitely, and you have the power to make them very real in your life. But you can just see those thoughts and not have them actually be your reality. But that's true.
I've got this vision of this conveyor belt of thoughts going past, and every now and then we just reach out and grab one of them and think I'll have you today, rather than just letting them go by.
Absolutely. And I encourage people to use metaphors. One I like is the train barreling down the tracks, and you're standing there at the station letting the train go. You're just there. You're witnessing it. You're experiencing it, but you're not on the train. So I encourage people to come up with these visual metaphors that really help.
I like that. What else have we got here? Attention is your best ally. A lot of your attention is consumed by thinking. Thoughts lure you into think them, believe them, and make them seem real. So what should we be focusing our attention on?
First, the breath. That's the anchor. That's the way into the present moment. Because this is all thoughts. The content of thoughts will take you away to the past and the future. Absolutely. That's what they do. And there's you said before, this person you're going to interview said we're wired to win. We're also wired to fear. The brain is wired for fear. It's the primitive brain is wired to look for threats to our environment, threats to our security, and to react. That's what the nervous system is about. The nervous system goes into fight, flight, or freeze when it perceives that there's a threat out there, and the brain structures and connections are wired in for that. So it's helpful to know that. There are things we can do about that, but it's helpful to know that's just kind of how the brain works, the animal brain. But what we can do is take big breaths. I'm a big fan of using the breath, because taking deep breaths, a big inhale and a big exhale, it starts to calm the nervous system. And once the nervous system starts to calm, then we begin to realize that we're not in that fight or flight fury, but we can see some options. Like our mind starts to clear. We can see things more clearly. So focusing on the breath, taking big inhales and big exhales, and letting yourself have the attention be right on the sensations of the breathing, that's a beginning anchor into the present moment. And then we can open up the present. I mean, there's, everything right in front of you, and just this sense, this kind of, this the truth of who we are is not a form, it's not a thing. It's like this sense of aliveness, this feeling of being conscious and aware, and that's we can tap into that. We can begin to tap into that when we pay attention to the breath. And it's tremendously peaceful.
I guess as well, if you're listening to this podcast, there will be nobody listening to this podcast who isn't aware that their attention sometimes is not on the right things. Like the last podcast we had, talking to mental coach Jared Tendler about the adult learning model, and we were talking about let me get this right, unconscious incompetence stage, where people, in terms of drinking, they don't even know they've got a drinking problem. So when I was in that state, I didn't even know that I was focusing my attention on negative things. It was my life. It was who I was. And when I quit drinking, I then realized that my attention was wrong. And then I could see that the attention of everyone around me was wrong. And I don't know if you want to talk about this a little bit, but it's one thing and let's talk about this. It's one thing we're saying here is we realize that our attention is focused on negativity or fear or things that are just not going to provide happiness in our life. And Gail is saying, use the breath as an anchor to get back into the moment, and then change that attention then will drift onto something happier, right? But what about the people around us who are not switched on, that they are focusing on stuff that's dragging them down? You've got to get away from those people, right? Or at least limit your interaction with them as much as possible.
Absolutely. I mean, that might be the intelligent thing to do. If you feel like being around a particular person is toxic or negative or not supportive of you, especially in the early stages when you're just starting to work with this stuff, because you're a bit in a fragile state, and these beautiful ideas of being grounded in the moment that we're talking about, it takes a while to really get there, and really to support yourself in every way, to not have those distractions and influences that pull you away. And yes, sometimes we pull away from people, or relationships fall away, or this is part of the deal that comes when we make the choice to grow and to grow into ourselves and be our full selves. There's a dance that takes place in relationship, and so say you're someone who needs something from other people, and then you attract people who are going to give that. So maybe that's an overbearing person. And then if you start waking up from your need to please other people or get stuff from other people, that controlling person isn't going to be the right, you're stopping the dance at that point. And that person hasn't stopped the dance. And so there might be some friction or some discomfort, because it's changing. That whole dynamic is changing. And that's what happens when we make the decision within ourselves to change. We're really bringing a whole different presence to our relationships. And it's common that other people aren't there and can't move with us and shift with us, and it causes problems. And then we relate as best we can. We learn communication skills. Like if somebody's been drinking a long time, they probably don't have good communication skills. So, learning those skills so that you can, first know yourself, but then be able to communicate in a clear and loving way with other people, and not be attached to the consequences, because they may not be happy ones.
Yeah, I actually believe in the last couple of decades, we've advanced more in a positive sense towards gender equality than any other time in our history. And I really believe that's because a lot more women are taking power and understanding that they have a say, not in their world, that's too big. They have a say in their relationship, that they are not owned by their husband, they are not bound by their children. me and my wife Liza, who's out there in the garden now playing with my daughter, 6-month-old daughter Zia, we had a conversation last night where we were saying we love her, she's absolutely fantastic, but she cannot be our everything. Mm-hmm. We can't have all our happiness from this little bundle of love. We need to create our own happiness, and that comes from very, very different sources. So if you are female and you are listening to this, I've grown up around women all my life. My mother raised me, 3 sisters. I got a father who is like very stereotypical male, working class, no feelings, doesn't tell you he loves you type of man. At some point, the only way you become able to live a beautiful life, unfortunately, is by making some really tough decisions and going through some pain and taking back control of your life. And every woman sorry guys, I'm just focusing on the women right now. Every woman I've seen do that, what a revelation. What a revelation. It's like the swans flying around everywhere all of a sudden. It's beautiful to see, and all right, it happens to men as well, but I do believe that the way that our society is, that females have had the rough end of the stick for many millions of years. Anyway, here's what was the other one I wanted to talk about here? The patterns and habits you created to hide from your feelings are strongly conditioned.
Absolutely. And I think that the key point there is about hiding from feelings. That the things we do, I actually said before I wasn't addicted. I haven't been addicted to a substance, but I've definitely been addicted to thinking and making thinking my reality. So, I think we all have a sense of being out of control of ourselves because we're in some kind of pattern that doesn't serve our happiness. And what underlies all of these patterns are our emotions. And, a point that I want to make is about really about kindness. When we reject our experience, say you're feeling an emotion, but you drink, that's a certain kind of violence to yourself because you're ignoring a very precious and present part of yourself, that anxiety or whatever it is that you feel. And there's this kind of violence that happens when we, it's inner war. Inner peace is when we're welcoming everything that happens in a space of loving awareness. And inner war is when we ignore ourselves, when we betray ourselves, when we abandon ourselves, when we don't look or respect what's going on with ourselves, and we go out there and try to fix things. And the beautiful about face that can happen is to bring our attention into our experience and be very kind with everything that arises is fine, and be very kind to what arises and very, very welcoming and very loving. And it's a beautiful way to be with yourself. And then you find it's a beautiful way to be with other people. You become much more peaceful, much less triggered by other people because you can see through. We're triggered by other people when we're in our heads and they're in our heads, and then we're having this friction. But when we can be fully with ourselves, that it kind of, I don't want to make it sound like easily automatic, but what naturally comes is this sense of compassion, like, oh, this person isn't just trying to, annoy me right now. They're hurting too. They're feeling anxious. They have unmet needs, and then that creates a whole different kind of conversation that's deeper and truer and way more connected.
Yeah, I had an example this morning that, to me, it's not the full-blown wars in your relationships that create the biggest problems. It's these slow stabbing wounds that eventually bleed you to death. And here's an example. I'm a busy guy, working, feeling the pressures of the man having to provide and all that crap that doesn't exist, the story that I've created. And my wife's looking after our 6-month-old child. And she said to me one day, stop washing the dishes and cleaning the kitchen. Just leave it alone and get on with your work. Okay? And then right now she's trying to organize an Easter photo shoot. And I'm not able to help her because I'm working, and she's carrying this baby around and doing it all. And I said, can I help you in any way? And she said, yeah, she said, you can clean up the dishes and stop making a mess in the kitchen, which is a contradiction. And my initial reaction, my subconscious 95% that I'm not in control, wants to say, yeah, but you told me. And I didn't today. I said, it happened in my head. The thought came by on that conveyor belt. The cloud came by with that thought, have a go. And I let it pass. And I said to her, I can do that to help you, love. And in that moment, because I said that, came connection. And I'm not bigging myself up here because I'm not all that, right? That has come about in the 8 years since I've quit alcohol, very slowly, having conversations with people like Gail. This is doing the work. Having a conversation with an enlightened spirit like Gail is doing the work. Listening to this conversation is doing the work. You're kind of like expanding your knowledge and your insights and your understanding. You can put that into practice. And eventually, you know, as these clouds come by, you're just not picking them as much as you used to. There is no answer as to why. It just doesn't happen. Anyway, I thought I would use that as an example because it's such a common one.
It's a beautiful example, though. I mean, and that's the choice we have because you've slowed down enough. You know, you have enough teachings integrated in you. You're not just listening to them. You're working with all this, you know, information that you're getting. And what that's done is it's put you in a position in that moment where you saw the thought pattern. You said, no, thank you. Your heart spoke instead. You responded to the moment, not to what your thoughts were saying. Your thoughts were saying, say something mean and cause a rupture in your relationship. But you said, no thoughts, I'm not going to go with you right now. And you were responding to the moment. In the moment, there was a request to do the dishes. And you said, sure, I'd love to.
Yeah. It's what's happened in the past and many, many times is two things happen. One is I turn around and say to myself, I need to be right here. I need to put it right. And then in that moment, I just do it. The other thing that happens to me a lot is I'll have that conversation with me and I'll say to myself, don't raise that now. It's an issue. And then an hour later, I will raise it in a different way, almost like gaslighting, almost in a subtle, manipulative way. I've noticed that as well. And the reason I just wagged my finger at you as you were talking was you were right. And I'd never thought about it that you do have a choice because that internal dialogue you're having in a millisecond about shall I cause a rift in our relationship or not right now, in a millisecond, that is your choice. Choice doesn't look like I got 5 minutes to dwell on this. Choice is milliseconds, but it's still a choice. I know it is because I've had those internal dialogues in those milliseconds and chosen to ignore the best approach and to hurt my wife and then apologizing afterwards. You know, there's a way around it. The other thing that I wanted to talk about then is yesterday I interviewed a beautiful woman from Costa Rica called Zara Sita, and I think she'll be on the podcast will be released on Monday. And she's a clairvoyant and a clairaudient and has clairaudience abilities, something way out of my scope of comprehension. But hey, let's keep an open mind about everything. And she said something really interesting, and I looked at it as a metaphor, but she was deadly serious, is that when she sees people who are becoming intoxicated with alcohol, she sees the soul leave the body and hang on with a tether because they don't want that toxicity. And then these evil spirits that are kind of have got no place to go dive into the space all of a sudden. And this is why we see this nonsense happen. It's almost like Jekyll and Hyde. You know, you start doing things that you would never do. You say things that you would never say. You black out and can't remember anything. And that just came up for me a little bit as you was talking then about running away from your issues and your problems. I had this vision of your soul literally saying, screw this for a laugh, I'm out of here. I don't want to deal with this. You know, and then what's left is this nightmare. The other thing that came up for me was...
Can I just comment? And
yes,
then our work then
yes.
is to bring that back in.
Yes.
Because that's in soul, you can use different words for it, but that's our intelligence. That's our truth. That's the part of us that's untouched by all the conditioning and effects of the addiction and everything. That is so important to recognize. That's left, and let's bring it back. It hasn't left permanently. It's always there and possible to reach out and bring that to bear on the moment.
But
bring that intelligence in.
But trying to, let's just stick with the metaphor of this soul or this intelligence, almost like floating like a helium-filled balloon with it wrapped around your neck. You're not going to be able to pull it back in if you're drunk.
No.
You won't have the comprehension to do it. It won't want to be back in your body anyway. Mm-hmm. And this is why we always feel so... This is why it's just so terrible that we have people in the world who believe that alcohol provides value when it just destroys lives. This is why I do this work, Gail. It absolutely makes me want to put my head through a wall. And one of the things that it upsets me, it really upsets me. And one of the things you said earlier on was we're like almost like meaning making machines. It's like we create this world in our heads that doesn't exist. But what I want to add to that is we need to understand as well that our world that we exist in is also imaginary. Now, bear with me a minute. I'm not saying when I look out the window that I can't see a tree, I can't see Gail through the computer. That's not what I'm talking about. Bear with me a minute, right? In Yuval Noah Harari's book, Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind, which I recommend to everybody to read, he talks about how we went from Homo sapiens, how we went from tribes of 150 people who biologically are not designed to work and cooperate together, to Donald Trump being in charge of 376 million people or whatever. How did we do that? And he says the way that we did it is we made imaginary things up. We created hierarchies. We talked about one earlier on, didn't we? The difference in equality between men and women. It doesn't exist on a biological level. There's no biological different reason why men seem to dominate the world. And he goes into depth in there and he breaks every barrier, every myth. Racial issues. You speak to a white supremacist and he will tell you biologically why blacks are inferior to whites, but it's complete nonsense. There is no biological evidence that that's correct. It's a cultural norm that we designed and created. There's an argument out there, take it any way you want. Religion is the same, right? Gods and deities, right? Why am I waffling on about this? The value, the view that alcohol creates value in your life doesn't exist. It's an illusion. It is something that we've created within society that is imaginary. How have they done that? Marketing, advertising. You are born to believe from a very, very young age that Santa Claus drinks alcohol. He comes around your house and you leave him a carrot for Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and a drink of whiskey for Santa Claus. And if you don't have any whiskey in my house, you left him a can of lager. And when you woke up in the morning, you wanted to see if he drunk that lager, because if he did, it meant he'd been there. Now, that is all imaginary. How can you not drink alcohol when you've been grown up through that culture that we created? And I want people to think about that a lot. It's not just in our minds that we make stuff up that really damages us. We need to be alive and awake to what's going on around us and what is real and what isn't real. And by that book, Sapiens, Brief History, not only will you learn about why you're here, but you will really be blown away by some of his theories. I don't know if you wanted to say anything on that, but I thought it was an important point.
Well, it's about, you're talking about like sort of institutionalized belief systems that we buy into. So any belief system or any position is something that, a belief, like this is how it is. I would, call to investigate that. Is that actually true? And there's so many things like culture and, gender. And I mean, some of these things run very deep. They're really all beliefs that we apply to this, this person, this body. But, these are there to be examined to see if they're actually true. First of all, do they serve? And second of all, are they true?
That's a really good point. Because if the belief serves a very valuable and positive purpose, then believe it.
Yeah, not a problem.
Right? So, okay, what do I mean by that? I'm not a religious person. However, I have read scientific evidence that having faith in a God can extend your life, say, right? Mm-hmm. But the way I see it is you don't have to have faith in a God, you have to have faith. Mm-hmm. So there is good empirical evidence that says having faith in something is good for you. Well, do that then. You don't have to, but you don't have to believe, you don't have to buy into the whole, if I don't believe in God, I'm going to go to hell. You don't have to buy into that and the potential damage that could happen. I know treading on religious paving stones is a little bit treacherous path to step, but I think that is really important. I think what Gail said then is important.
Most beliefs, and I'm not talking just about religious, but any beliefs, and especially beliefs about who you think you are, they divide and they separate and they create distance from other people and from the world. And, it's good to look at, just to bring it personal, your belief systems about yourself, that there's something wrong with me, that I'm lacking, that I'm broken, that I had a crappy childhood, so that means I'm going to have a crappy life. Those are all beliefs that we hold about ourselves that don't serve, and they limit us, and they put us into a bubble that isn't a happy place to be, and it's based on an untruth. It's just believing things without examining what these beliefs actually are. And when we start to examine them and look with the eyes of truth, we start to see that these things, for example, I had a terrible child, a terrible upbringing, so therefore there's something wrong with me. No. You had an upbringing with people who were having trouble dealing with themselves and had their own pain and were doing the best that they could, but didn't give you what you needed. But that has absolutely no reflection on who you are. So to analyze and examine a belief like that is really important and essential to our peace and happiness.
And for me, and I see this in other people as well, that examination of our beliefs, our values, our culture, just philosophizing never happened when I was a drinker. Never happened. I was just stuck on automatic pilot. I just woke up in the morning, I brushed my teeth, I went to work, I come home, I kissed my wife, I watched telly all night, and then I went to bed and rinse and repeat. When you quit drinking alcohol, we talked about this a little bit earlier, a lot of people find fear in this wonderful, expansive white space that's in front of them that now is saying, come on, come in here and have some fun. And you go back to drinking because you're not used to the equanimity of it, the calmness of it, right? Interrogate, examine, read books like I've just said, and then every book then takes you to another book and just learn and grow your experiences and really kind of, like Gail said, a very important point, examine whether your beliefs are true or not. Where do they come from? How do they exist? How do they serve you? I love all that. And you say in your book, there are no wounds inside of you that need to be healed, which is what you just touched upon. They're
just belief systems that need to be examined, but there aren't actual wounds that need to be healed. I know that in my own experience, but when you really start looking at your own experience, and I really encourage people to get curious, like, what are your thoughts? Where's your attention going? Do these inner experiments, and you get to see, like, oh, that I've just kind of taken that on as a belief system, not really true.
So I guess One terrible example could be an incest survivor who 40 years later still cannot function and experience happiness in life because they still believe they are a victim of that person and of that circumstance.
That's right.
And as horrific as an experience as that was, without absolving any blame on the individual who was the perpetrator of that, what we're saying here is there is no past and there is no future. There is only right now, and a choice to be made about how we're going to live in that moment and whether or not we're going to grab that cloud as it passes by. That is the word incest, attack, etc. All that story. We go to grab it, but we hold back and we let it go. And then we choose another one that says, I'm going to listen to this podcast between Gail and Lee and see if I can get past this. And there's lots of other way that you can get around that to do the work. But what Gail is saying and what Gail says in her book is you don't have to do the work. You just have to understand that those were experiences that you had, and they shaped who you are today. And that is who you are today, and accept who you are today. But also accept that we live in a moment by moment existence, right?
And maybe you've made some conclusions about what happened then about yourself that aren't actually true. I worked with someone recently with this problem, and we started, and this is might complicate things a little, but we started untangling the story and realizing what was going on in the family that allowed this terrible thing to happen. And there was so much understanding and even in the end, compassion, but, seeing that every single person in the family was hurting in their own way and doesn't in any way give the stamp of approval to bad behavior. It's terrible when that kind of thing happens. But the understanding around it for this particular person helped to release her from the pain because she really saw this really had nothing to do with her. She happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time, but it had nothing to do with anything personal about her. It was a reflection of what was going on in the family. And that helped to release her because she held a belief system, and that was the thing that unhooked that belief system for her.
Yeah, I support that in all the conversations that I've had with people who've been in similar situations. The opportunity to realize that unless the person who hurt you is a psychopath, and the likelihood of that being true is not really good odds, is to understand that there would have been a reason why something happened, why they did what they did, and whilst you don't have to absolve, you don't have to
absolutely doesn't excuse them.
It doesn't. That's it. You don't have to excuse them, but there is great healing power in forgiveness and being able. And let's just pull this back a little bit and talk about really everyday occurrences where people are just in relationships where they think that their partner is deliberately hurting them. And very often when you're able to get in their shoes, to use an old cliche, you will understand that they're not trying to hurt you. There's one example that I always use, Gail. When I quit 20 years on the railway because of Jack Canfield and decided I was going to help people quit alcohol, and I started writing, and I'd never written before. And my best friend at the time rung me up, and I told him that I was leaving the railway. And he turned around and said to me, and I always remember this, and it did fracture our relationship, is he said, "But I've read your work and it's rubbish. Who would want to pay for it?" And it did fracture our relationship. But then I realized that he was trying to help me. He was trying to scare me into not leaving the railway because he thought that I was making the wrong decision for myself and my family. And he didn't have the same faith in my ability to get beyond that than I did. He had a different worldview. We don't keep in touch as much as we used to now, just because our lives are different. But I forgave him for that, and I was able to. I think a younger me would have held that against him for a long time, and I would never have even interrogated it. I would have just said, "What a bastard," and I would have left it at that. You know, and that leads on to the final quote where you say, "Take any situation that makes you suffer, take away the thinking, and there goes the story." You know.
There goes the story, and then you're left with you're here in your own experience. You're here with this presence. You're out of your mind. You're out of the past. You're out of the future. You're out of the veils that you live behind. You've cleared everything up. If you don't pay attention to the thoughts, there's clear seeing. There's no division between the inside and the outside. You're not applying your belief systems about yourself and the world to everything. You're living open and free and open-hearted. It's beautiful.
And one last thing that I wanted to ask you, and then we'll call time on it, is so many times I hear people saying, "I just want to be normal." What is normal?
You know, you're already, I don't even use that word very much. You're normal. Be with yourself, accept yourself as you are, work with your experience, get the help that you need. You're normal. You're normal.
Everybody listening to this podcast, get this into your skull. You are normal. We're all different. We all face different challenges. We all suffer to various different degrees. Our levels of happiness are very different and varied, but we all have a choice in the moment every single time, and every single one of us is normal. And if we can learn to accept that we don't need to be fixed, that we're fine just the way that we are, life becomes so much easier to navigate. Dr. Gail Brenner, I've had a wonderful time this past 90 minutes. You are a beautiful person. I've learned so much. I'm going to go back and reread the book now we've had a good conversation. I just want to say thank you for writing it and for crossing something off your bucket list, which will now help thousands of people around the world really get a deep insight and take control of their lives. And I cannot think of a more empowering thought than people suddenly taking control and being able to live a wonderful life, which is what the Needy Helper is all about. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much. Really my pleasure to be here.